So up next, we are going to be talking with George. Now, George is the next company from NetraMark Holdings and is the one that is a game changer here. They're using AI to transform clinical trials. They're cutting errors by staggering amounts, and they're redefining how data drives healthcare decisions. Now, trailblazing the sector is Mr. CEO George Achilleos himself, a visionary with the know-how to turn complex tech into real-world impact. NetraMark is not just innovating, they're actually rewriting the rules. George, it is so great to see you again. Always a great conversation with you. I'm handing it over to you. Give it a go.
Thanks, Lindsay. Always great speaking with you, and it was great to see you in Germany. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. Everything's okay? Perfect. So I'll just get right started into the presentation with respect to NetraMark, who we are and what we have to offer. At a very high level, NetraMark is an artificial intelligence company that is focused and pointed at the pharmaceutical industry. Essentially, what we do is take a pharmaceutical company's clinical trial data. So at the end of each phase of a clinical trial, a pharmaceutical company gets data. We ingest that data and analyze it to the specifications of the enrichment guidelines that are put out by the FDA. And our purpose is to try to discover what is actually driving drug response, placebo issues, or adverse events. Can we find a subpopulation within the trial mix of people that were in the trial that are causing these potential issues? At the end of the day, clinical trials fail at an exorbitantly high rate. And I think there's a desperate need for some form of technology to advance clinical trial processes as we move forward. That's what NetraMark is focused on. On that note, I just mentioned at a very high level, if you look at the whole clinical trial process, a very, very high level of failure exists if you're talking about the identification of a molecule right through the clinical trial process, through to commercialization. About 88% of candidate medicines fail to run the gauntlet, if you will. Where we come in is what we talk about are these later phases, phase 2 and phase 3. So when you're going through a trial, you go through preclinical or drug discovery, preclinical, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and then you go out into market. So the question is, as you get into these later phases, is there any work that a company such as ours could do to analyze the clinical trial data that comes out of that phase and basically be able to inform the design of the subsequent phase? So in these later phases, I did talk about an 88% failure rate, but in these later phases, a successful phase 2, if you're just going to hear anything of what I just said, what you really should focus in on is, imagine you discover a drug, you make it through your preclinical, your phase 1, and you make it through phase 2, and you actually have a successful phase 2 outcome. You meet your endpoint. Great, everybody's excited. The reality is that in phase 3, you're still looking at between a 50 to 65% failure rate, generally speaking, depending on the therapeutic area. So imagine how high that is. You make it all the way through to phase 2 successfully, and then you fail in phase 3. This is the worst place to fail. And this is the area that we focus on, phase 2 data and phase 3 data that we would get from a clinical trial company. So sometimes what I like to do, because this is a very complicated subject matter area, and sometimes it's difficult for investors to follow, I want to try and simplify this as much as humanly possible. And I do that by outlining a little bit of what we don't do. Perhaps that'll provide a little more context. So in the area of drug discovery, there are many companies that are using artificial intelligence to ingest vast amounts of data to help them discover new drugs using artificial intelligence. Now, it makes sense to point artificial intelligence there because artificial intelligence and machine learning loves data. So why not first point it to where the largest amounts of data are? So that's why there's a lot going on there with respect to drug discovery. So to be clear, we do not do this. I'm just pointing this out because we get this a lot. Are you a drug discovery company? The answer is no, we are not. The other area where artificial intelligence is often pointed is in what we call clinical operations. So you've discovered a drug, perhaps using artificial intelligence or not. You then write a protocol and you start into this clinical trial process, phase 1, phase 2, etc. While you're running a trial, there's a lot of stuff you need to do. For example, I got to go recruit people into the trial and administer the subjective medicines, etc. I got to capture data. There's a lot of work to do. So let me give you an example. There's lots of companies that are out there using artificial intelligence to ingest these massive electronic medical record databases. And why are they doing that? Those are big databases, and perhaps what we can do using AI is to help you find patients faster. That makes sense to pharmaceutical companies, etc. Another great place to point artificial intelligence. Why? Because there's large amounts of data. So to be clear, we don't do that. So what I've established so far is we do not do drug discovery. We do not do clinical operations. So then the question becomes, well, what is it that you exactly do, George, at NetraMark? And what we do at NetraMark is you can see at the end of each of these phases, there's what's called a data readout. So if you're a pharmaceutical company, you finish phase 2. At the end of that, you get data associated with your trial, and you need to do stuff with that data. What we do is we take that data, we analyze that data to help you better understand and design this thing over here called a protocol. So you can think of a protocol as essentially an architectural document that you submit to the regulator. And in that are things like, well, a definition of what the drug is, a definition of the study population and who you're going to include or who you're going to exclude, et cetera. So there's all sorts of things within this protocol. And what we do is inform a very important part of that protocol design, which is the study population. So as what I said at the very beginning of this presentation, we ingest that clinical trial data. We discover subpopulations that could be impacting either drug response, placebo response, if you're in an area that has placebo, or adverse events. We find those subpopulations and we tell the pharmaceutical company, when you're designing the protocol for the next phase, you should enrich, is the word, the inclusion-exclusion criteria. Make adjustments to who you include or exclude. We're doing this all pre-randomization and in accordance with the guidance from the FDA or the regulator at hand, so that everything's appropriate and aligned with the guidance. So that's what we do. And so we help better design the protocol so that when you go into the next phase, you have a higher probability of completing the next phase successfully. Hopefully that makes sense. So the question then becomes is, well, George, don't these pharmaceutical companies, when they get that clinical trial data, don't they analyze the data? And the answer is yes. They do what's called a univariate analysis or a small multivariate analysis. You have a lot of smart people at a pharmaceutical company and they say to themselves, we had a successful phase 2. It did okay. Let's ask some questions. What if we ran some statistics on this variable and that variable? And the average trial collects between 500 variables and 20,000 variables per patient, okay? So imagine if you had 100 patients in your study and 65% of studies have 200 or less patients in them. So imagine just for the sake of argument here, you had 100 patients and you collected 1,000 variables per patient. The permutations and combinations to find 2 or 3 or 4 variables that could be associated with drug response, placebo issues, or adverse event is in the trillions. So a human can't do this. So the notion that the pharmaceutical company is going to handpick some variables, which the regulator doesn't like because they feel like there's bias in that selection process, but the notion that we're going to handpick some variables and discover what might be causing issues with my drug, or et cetera, really is a very difficult proposition, and that's where NetraMark comes in. We literally can analyze 20,000 variables simultaneously, which is important because from the regulator perspective, you need to take an unbiased approach to analyzing the data. So NetraMark takes all these variables on a per patient level, analyzes them simultaneously, and then spits out, we found some subpopulations that include these variables that are affecting drug response, for example. Those, as I said, combinations and permutations are in the trillions. It takes the machine 15, 16, 17 hours to run all those possible combinations. So that's what Netra AI does. How do we do it? We have a proprietary AI, to be clear. We're not just using some large language model that's available, et cetera. The founder of this technology is Dr. Joseph Geraci. He spent almost 7 years trying to figure out the proprietary mathematical algorithms that are associated with what I've discussed up until this point. So we call that our attractor AI. So it's our proprietary mathematical approach to analyzing the clinical trial data and finding statistically relevant subpopulations. These aren't patented, they're trade secrets because we don't want to expose any of the mathematics behind this. I get this question, is the market massive? There are thousands and thousands and thousands of clinical trials going on. And if you look at clinical trial support services, it's about a $47 billion market by 2032. So it's a massive market, a lot of money being spent. And if you look at AI in healthcare, there's a lot of money being thrown at this right now. So it's a really huge market. So I think what I've described so far is you've got a pharmaceutical industry that's got a problem. Clinical trials fail at a very high rate. You've got a clear solution. Netra AI can potentially affect the clinical trial success rates using our proprietary AI. So the next question is there an experienced team behind this? My background is in technology. I spent many years at IBM. I've spent my whole 30-year career in various technology industries, but I'm not a pharmaceutical person. So what I needed to recruit was a very highly experienced pharmaceutical team. So let me quickly run through some of these people, as I think it's an important backdrop when you're evaluating a company and whether you want to make an investment in that company or not. So the founder of the technology is Dr. Joseph Geraci. He has his PhD in mathematics that he got with DARPA. He has a postdoc in oncology, a postdoc in psychiatry, and a postdoc in quantum medicine. So he is the individual that spent all these years coming up with the proprietary mathematics behind the technology. Josh Spiegel is our president and responsible for commercialization. He has been in the pharmaceutical industry. He's a banker by trade, but has been in the pharmaceutical industry from a commercialization perspective with an organization called Verify. That company was sold a few years back for $330 million US to a company called WCG Clinical. Okay. Our Chief Innovation and Regulatory Officer is Dr. Luca Pani, who's the former Director General of the Italian Medicines Agency, who oversaw over 800 drugs go into that market, worked on senior committees within the European Medicines Agency, now resides in Washington. Our Chief Medical Officer is Dr. Larry Alfs, who's the former Executive Director at Pfizer and Head of Therapeutics at Johnson & Johnson. And our Chief Strategy Officer, Angelico Carda. He was the co-founder and president of Worldwide Clinical Trials, and I'll talk about this in a moment. They're a contract research organization in the world of pharmaceuticals. About 70% of the trials that are out there are outsourced to someone or an organization to run. Those are called contract research organizations. Worldwide Clinical Trials is a huge contract research organization that operates in over 65 countries around the world, and a few years back was purchased by Kohlberg, a private equity firm, and you can look this up. I think the purchase was over $2 billion. So I'm going to just quickly dive into this. How do we do it? There's a lot on here. I will not go through this in excruciating detail, but I do want you to understand a few points at a very high level. Number one, our process takes 4 to 6 weeks. The reason it even takes 4 to 6 weeks is because the largest amount of work is in step 1, which is we take all of this multimodal data in whatever format, qualitative, biological, etc. It's often somewhat disorganized when we get it from the industry. So we spend almost 3 weeks just organizing the data. So that's the majority of the heavy lifting. Once we've organized the data, we put it into what we call our proprietary Netra AI sandbox, where the attractor AI and all of our proprietary technology sits. That machine runs for about 15, 16, 17 hours and basically starts to split the populations into what we call favorable participants, unfavorable participants, and unexplainable participants. To quickly touch on the unexplainable participants, this is where the machine says, I don't actually understand this, which is a lot different than a standard machine learning, where it's trying to force fit populations into buckets. We say, here's an unexplainable bucket of participants where the machine doesn't understand what bucket they should fit into. It actually pushes those participants off to the side so that the machine doesn't overfit the results. Okay, so as it runs its trillions of combinations, it then spits out these explainable personas, which are characteristics of what we call treatment responders, placebo non-responders, and characteristics of placebo responders, treatment non-responders. The good people that you want in the trial, the bad people that you don't want in the trial. and then it spits it out into what we call inclusion-exclusion criteria, written criteria that a pharmaceutical company can choose to add into that protocol that I discussed earlier. And this is just a little look-see into what that looks like. Again, I don't expect you to, in 30 seconds, ingest what this means, but this is essentially a persona, and it says, here are the 3 variables that the machine found, this is the ranges, and these are the statistical values associated with it, so you can feel comfortable that these are statistically relevant subpopulations. So let's now go into the commercialization. We have 2 routes that we're taking from a commercialization perspective, going direct to the pharmaceutical industry and going through channel partners. Direct meaning we're doing outreach direct to the pharmaceutical industry and the pharmaceutical companies to get them to potentially engage with us in contracts directly. We've got a little over 30 companies in our pipeline right now that we're working through our sales process. So we're going to keep going at it from a direct perspective. That's just part of our core business. The other is channel partners. So I touched on this earlier. This is highlighting our worldwide clinical trials relationship. So we announced in April of this year that we've entered into a global agreement with Worldwide Clinical Trials. The idea here is that we'll be embedded into all their phase 2 or many of their phase 2 and phase 3 studies as a worldwide offering. So it'll be called something XYZ, powered by NetraMark, and will be embedded into all of those bids as they move forward once we're done the onboarding. We're just about done the onboarding, which is a long process of going through quality assurance, and we should be launching with them within the next couple of weeks, probably 2 weeks to 4 weeks from now. So that means, again, when Worldwide puts a bid forward to run the trial, there will be a line item in there which will be, you know, the NetraMark technology to analyze that trial, and we're getting paid by Worldwide Clinical Trials. I do want to be clear, though, once we sign a deal, this is for a trial that is going to be running in the future. That goes into what we call a contract backlog, and when that trial reads out, that's when we do the work and get paid. So what we want to do for right now is build contract backlog as large as humanly possible, booked contract backlog. The other 2 things that I want to highlight is we also last year announced a collaboration with the NIH or the NIMH, which is one of the 27 institutes of the National Institutes of Health, which is one of the largest biological research organizations in the world. The idea here is these collaborations are important because what we need is partners to publish to journals for peer review, because the industry really looks at that from a credibility perspective. This agreement was for us to analyze their ketamine studies, and we've put forward, and we're just waiting to hear from one of our first peer review joint publications that joint pieces that we put forward with the NIMH. We should be hearing about that within the next 30 days. So that was co-published with them using the data from their ketamine studies. The other thing that we also announced basically just a couple of weeks ago was a collaboration with Mayo with respect to analyzing their GBM data. So this is another prolific collaboration where we're getting this data and we're analyzing this data for the purposes of either co-publishing or potentially even finding biomarkers, et cetera, that we might use to help inform trials in this area moving forward. Another important industry collaboration that helps with the credibility and the validation of the technology. The other thing that's very important is that I want to highlight is that on December 3rd, we have what's called a CPIM meeting, a Critical Path Innovation meeting. About 8 or 9 months ago, we applied to the FDA for a Critical Path Innovation meeting. This is quite a process. Like I said, it's taken us 8 months. It's not easy to get a closed door meeting with the FDA. They only have 7 or 8 of these per year. And so what this is a meeting that's a closed door meeting where all parts of the FDA come together to evaluate the NetraMark technology so that we can potentially get further guidance from the FDA with respect to our tool and potentially elevating the validation of the tool within the industry. So that meeting is now, we got accepted after an 8-month process to have a Critical Path Innovation meeting with the FDA. The meeting's occurring on December the 3rd. So we're very excited about that. And then the last chart, and then I think we'll go on to any questions, is people always ask about the cap table. We have a very clean balance sheet. There's no debt. There's no preferred shares. There's about 87 million common shares, just a little over 87 million in the float, the public traded float. On a fully diluted basis, there's a little over 96 million shares, so pretty tight cap table. There are some warrants, not very many warrants left. If you look in October this year, there's about 845,000 that come due with a 40-cent strike price, and we're about $1.35. So those will come in, and then in June, the balance. That's really the high-level presentation. Lindsay, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, George. Quite a few questions for you coming in for sure. And we have 10 minutes left. So the first one is, you said that you need 3 weeks to analyze the data. Does this mean that you do the analysis for the client, or the pharmaceutical, or I mean, could the pharmaceutical company not handle the AI model itself?
Oh, so I get this. So first of all, just to be clear, it's a 4 to 6 week process. The 3 weeks of that process is just us organizing the data from the pharmaceutical company. The actual running of the AI is literally 15, 16, 17 hours. And I get this question, well, can't the pharmaceutical companies do this on their own? And the answer to this question is no. So these methods that we use create what's called a combinatorial explosion, trillions of combinations. And so using standard statistical models, using large language models that exist, using the approaches of machine learning that are historically used within the pharmaceutical industry are not possible to actually analyze this data. I can point people to, there's a publication that we put out on ARXIV for your mathematicians that are out there. And what we did was we took that ketamine data and we said, okay, we're going to give the same data to ChatGPT, we're going to give it to DeepSeek, and we're going to give it to the traditional machine learning models, all the things that a typical pharmaceutical company might consider. And I can tell, and we ran it through NetraMark, okay? The same data. I can tell you with ChatGPT, DeepSeek, and all the traditional methods, not one of those methods was able to produce a single variable or combination of variable that was associated with drug response, placebo, etc. Only Netra AI was. And once we got those variables, we fed them back into ChatGPT, DeepSeek, and the traditional machine learning models, and they all validated the findings. So for those that are interested, you can go to ARXIV and you can look for this publication, Pete.
Great answer for sure. Now, George, the AI space is crowded and promises quickly turn to the blah, blah, blah. What's the one thing NetraMark can do that nobody else in the world can? And further to that, why will it make investors money before anyone else even catches on?
Well, there's two parts to this, right? So the first thing I say is, if any of your listeners out there or viewers have attempted to sell anything to the pharmaceutical industry, they will understand what I'm about to say, which is the first moat is the pharmaceutical industry. It's at least 2 to 3 years of work to penetrate the pharmaceutical industry, to sell them a novel, new approach. So the first barrier to entry is the industry itself. Because it's got a regulator hovering over top, it's very averse to changing its process. We're over 2 years into our commercialization process and have begun to sign contracts. So the first moat is that. The second moat is it took Dr. Geraci 7+ years to figure out the mathematics behind this. I do not think that this is an easy problem to solve. And finally, most AI machine learning groups out there aren't looking here, because where AI companies typically look is where's the largest amount of data. And when you're talking about 65% of trials having 200 or less patients and 90% having 1,000 or less, those are considered small data sets. Most people don't even consider looking there because it's a very, very difficult problem to solve.
Okay, so then could AI not write the code to replicate this in less than 7 years?
AI itself?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Okay, so even if it started learning the prompts and all the things, anybody couldn't just go, okay, XYZ, go for it.
I mean, anybody could go for it tomorrow if they wanted to. There's no barriers to that. But there would be two problems with that. Number one is, how are you going to penetrate the industry? and you're using, let's say, some kind of AI agent to write code for you or something like that to potentially produce the very detailed mathematics behind this, the largest AI companies aren't really looking at this because they're thinking it's too difficult a problem to solve. So I would say to people, if you want to do that, go ahead and try. But how are you going to show validation to the pharmaceutical industry of how you wrote this? If you're going to say, well, we had some AI agents write this, there are, without me getting into the details, people can look up the FDA enrichment guidance and they will see all the barriers, that must be met in order for you to be able to enrich a trial. And if you look at all of that, I think it would be very hard for somebody to go and do this. That's my opinion. I'm CEO. I'm biased, obviously.
That's what your opinion is, and you're sticking with it. Now, George, we had the opportunity to actually sit down and really dive deeper into your story. I have one more question. We're going to give the audience just a sneak peek of one of the questions that we did ask in that interview coming out later this week. You've publicly claimed NetraMark can deliver 90% gross margins through software leverage. But real pharma deployments demand custom integrations, they demand compliance overhead, and they demand audits and training as well as support. So can you clarify us, when you say 90%, do you mean the pure algorithm module only or all in client delivered?
So first of all, that's a great question, especially the nuance of how you phrase that there, Lindsay, which is quality assurance, integration, et cetera. So first of all, from an integration perspective, there is no integration. The pharmaceutical company does nothing. They pass us the data. There's no work for them. We're not integrating into their systems, et cetera. We're either spinning up an instance behind their firewall or outside their firewall, depending on the preference of the pharmaceutical company. So there is no integration. From a quality assurance perspective, okay, not all, but let's say 50% of the time, you have to go through a QA review. We have all of the QA documents and processes, et cetera, all in a sandbox. And so we have a full-time QA person on hand that essentially manages the QA qualification process with the pharmaceutical company. So why I say the next part is, how'd you come up with gross margins? Because this 90% gross margin, it's very simple. Okay, you have 100,000, let's just say for round numbers, 100,000 of revenue. What is the variable cost of goods sold that's spun up because you had this engagement? And the answer is, we have an instance that spins up on an Amazon Web Services, cloud platform, very inexpensive, okay? There could be some additional data wranglers that we hire on a very contract basis to help organize the process, thousands of dollars, and our average contracts are 200 to 300,000 US. So a very tiny amount of work gets spun up in a variable nature because we got a contract. All the rest is fixed costs. Whether we have contract or no contract, we have a certain SG&A level. And just to highlight that number, it's around 2.3 million US per year is our fixed cash SG&A burn. So anything over that essentially comes in as gross margin dollars. So hopefully I explain the variable nature. And the last bit I'll put is, because we're under IFRS accounting standards in North America and we're public traded, we've established this flow of SG&A fixed costs and variable costs. So it's accepted under our IFRS practices moving forward.
Amazing. Always amazing to talk with you, George. We've run out of time for sure. Tell us, where can we find you? What is your website?
So if we trade on the CSE in Canada under the symbol AIAI. Hopefully that's pretty simple for people to understand. Over in Germany, we trade on TradeGate and Frankfurt under the symbol PF0, and in the US under OTCQB AINMF is the symbol. And the website is really easy to remember. It's just NetraMark.com.
Beautiful. Well done. For all of you out there, if you want a little bit of a deeper dive, head over to the website, and the longer interview between George and I, it drops later this week, so stay tuned. Thank you again for your time, George, and we will see you soon.
Thanks, Lindsay. Always a pleasure.